The Young and the Restless spoilers. The mystery that had consumed Genoa City for weeks, who killed Damian Cain, was finally beginning to unravel in the most unexpected of ways. And while the official investigation focused on Cain Ashby, Nick Newman, and a spiraling circle of suspects who had all gathered at the French estate, it was a set of silent clues, whispers in the walls, names buried in dust, and the lingering scent of old vendettas that led fans of The Young and the Restless to unearth a theory so staggering it might just shatter every assumption and turn the spotlight towards someone everyone had ignored: Carter, the manservant, the assistant, the background figure always present, always listening. The storm began with an innocuous discovery, almost mundane at first glance. Sharon and Nick had been confined to Cain's sprawling, ivy-covered estate in the French countryside. Their supposed imprisonment was softened by luxurious surroundings but stifled by an atmosphere heavy with dread. As Sharon wandered through one of the less traveled hallways in the West Wing, she stumbled upon a narrow stairwell that descended into a forgotten cellar. It was there that she unearthed an old chest, filled with time-worn black-and-white photographs, brittle letters, and a leather-bound album bearing the faded, gold-embossed name DeLeon. What began as innocent curiosity quickly darkened into something more unsettling. The DeLeon family, once owners of the estate and its surrounding vineyards, had vanished from public memory. Their legacy reduced to aged vines and family portraits stored in the shadows. Yet their presence still lingered, in architectural flourishes, in the design of the stained glass, in the initials carved into the stone hearth of the great room. The photos showed a proud family. Patriarchs in well-tailored suits, matriarchs in sun-drenched fields, children playing between grapevines. It was a legacy of generational beauty, violently erased when the property changed hands in a suspicious transaction more than a decade earlier. And now the estate belonged to Cain. That revelation, on its own, would not have meant much, until it intersected with the increasingly unsettling presence of Carter. Observant fans across online forums began dissecting every moment Carter appeared on screen. His silences. His glances. The way he always knew where everyone was, what they were doing, and especially how he always seemed to anticipate Cain's needs before Cain even voiced them. Too perfect. Too invisible. The theory exploded: what if Carter wasn't just an employee? What if he was a DeLeon, possibly the last surviving heir, hiding in plain sight with a lifelong vendetta? A man born into legacy, stripped of it by business deals masked as progress, forced to watch the ancestral home turned into a place of vanity and excess. A vineyard replaced with a sculpted hedge maze. A kitchen remodeled, the wine cellar converted into a security vault. The depth of that betrayal could curdle into something far darker. And now Damian was dead, found in the estate's walk-in freezer, his body frozen and discarded like spoiled food. The police pointed fingers at Nick, at Cain, even at Phyllis and Amanda, who had traveled for the ill-fated party. But as the pieces came together, Carter's motives became undeniable. Damian was not just an accidental victim. He had been one of Cain's few allies in securing the property years ago. A financial whisperer who helped seal the deal through questionable intermediaries. Killing him wasn't just murder. It was revenge served cold, the final strike in a blood-soaked chess game Carter had been playing since childhood. Fans noted how Carter's demeanor shifted each time someone brought up Damian's death. He neither flinched nor overcompensated with false emotion. He simply listened, observed, absorbed. When Amanda questioned him directly, he played dumb with eerie precision. When Lily begged him to help Cain, he did, but just enough to keep Cain vulnerable, desperate, off balance. The theory gained traction when an anonymous Reddit user leaked an unaired deleted scene, showing Carter visiting an old grave hidden behind the estate's chapel. The tombstone read Matilda DeLeon, Forever Our Light. He knelt, placing a single grapevine clipping beside it. A quiet tribute from a man with a memory that refused to die. The scene never made it to television but was enough to send the fandom into a frenzy. A background character with no clear past. An estate with buried history. a dead man tied to an old transaction. The evidence, circumstantial but compelling, painted Carter not as a loyal aide, but as the orchestrator of a slow-burning, generational act of vengeance. Suddenly, his every word and gesture became loaded. His loyalty to Cain wasn't loyalty at all, it was surveillance. His calm under pressure wasn't professionalism, it was premeditation. The real twist came when Mariah, helping Tessa investigate a missing shipment of wine from the estate's old cellars, stumbled across a handwritten journal hidden in the wall behind a vintage cask. It wasn't dated, but the entries detailed a boy's trauma, watching his family evicted, his father humiliated, and the house sold to a foreign investor who had no interest in preserving the land's heritage. The handwriting matched a note Carter had once written on an invitation. The proof was circumstantial, but in soap opera logic, emotionally undeniable. What followed was a domino effect. Lily began to question the strange coincidences, how Carter was the first to discover Damian's body, how he alone had access to the freezer's lock override, how his alibi the night of the murder consisted of vague chores and unseen errands. Phyllis, initially dismissive of the theory, remembered a moment just before Damian's death when Carter had offered him a drink from a special reserve bottle, wine that was later found to be laced with a rare paralytic. The poison hadn't killed Damian outright, but it had immobilized him. He had likely been alive when Carter dragged him into the freezer. The horror of that realization fractured the already fragile peace in the Newman and Abbott circles. Nick, long tormented by the accusation, confronted Carter in a chilling face-off, demanding to know the truth. But Carter, true to form, said nothing, only smiled faintly, as if savoring the poetry of Nick's despair. The truth, as always in Genoa City, was elusive. But the story, now taking on a life of its own, refused to be silenced. The DeLeon legacy had never truly died, it had just bided its time, waiting for the right moment to reclaim what was lost. And Damian Cain, unfortunately, had stood in the wrong place at the wrong time. In the wake of the reveal, the mansion felt colder, the walls more oppressive. Sharon, shaken by her discovery, begged authorities to reopen the case. Amanda demanded a forensic re-examination. Chance launched an unofficial probe, secretly interviewing the estate's former employees, tracing old property records, trying to find a paper trail that could prove Carter's hidden identity. But Carter was careful. Too careful. His records were spotless. No fingerprints, no past, no trace. A ghost in the system. The most dangerous kind of man, one with nothing to lose and everything to avenge. Whether justice would ever catch up to Carter remained unclear. But one thing was certain, the fans had seen what the characters hadn't. And now that the curtain had been pulled back, there was no turning away. The question was no longer who killed Damian. It was how far will Carter go before someone stops him? Because in the world of the young and the restless, revenge is never over. It just changes form, waiting to rise again, like a vine cut too close to the root. And somewhere, deep beneath the stones of the DeLeon estate, something was still growing. Something twisted, patient, and very, very alive. The whispers of conspiracy that once only echoed in the darker corners of online fan forums had now taken on a life of their own. A single Reddit post had encapsulated what thousands had been thinking but hadn't dared to say aloud: if Carter is a descendant of the DeLeon family, and if he's angry that Cain bought the family estate and replaced the vineyard with a ridiculous hedge maze, wouldn't that make him the perfect suspect? That theory, as wild as it sounded at first, soon became a rallying cry for armchair detectives and loyal fans alike. And it wasn't just the emotion behind it, it was the logic. In the serialized universe of the young and the restless, no name is dropped without meaning, no photo album is found without consequence, and certainly no ancestral estate is reduced to a decorative backdrop without awakening the ghosts of the past. Suddenly, Carter's presence at the estate wasn't a convenience, it was an omen. And what came next only fueled the fire. Once the idea of Carter's hidden identity took root, fans began analyzing his every move since Damian's death with laser focus. From the moment the body was found, Carter's behavior had been anything but consistent. He claimed to have discovered Damian while doing routine inventory of the kitchen's cold storage, but later slipped during a heated exchange with Victor and Chance. When confronted during a private interrogation in the estate's library, he let out a chilling detail: he knew where the murder weapon had been hidden before the police ever revealed its location. It was an offhand comment, one he tried to walk back, but the damage was done. Chance and Victor locked eyes, both realizing at once what that meant. Only the killer, or someone who had planted the evidence, would have that knowledge. And Carter had just slipped. But even more troubling than his verbal misstep was his demeanor. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't even defensive. He was cold, unreadable, calm in a way that only someone with absolute control over their actions could be. When asked about the bloody knife found inside a storage crate on a train car that had been meant for Nick Newman's return trip, Carter simply shrugged, feigning confusion. But there were no fingerprints on the weapon, no fibers that could clearly identify anyone. Whoever planted it knew exactly how to remove trace evidence. And who, among all the guests and staff, had daily access to the estate's underground maintenance routes and shipping logs? Carter. The deeper Chance investigated, the more questions arose. Surveillance footage from the night of the murder had conveniently gone missing, erased, corrupted, or perhaps deliberately deleted. Victor, skeptical of everyone by nature, had insisted on reviewing backup files, only to find those gone as well. Amanda, sensing something deeply wrong, traced the digital signature of the missing data. It pointed back to the estate's central control system, one only a handful of people knew how to access. Carter had been responsible for syncing security updates in the weeks leading up to the party. If he had programmed in a backdoor to scrub specific recordings, no one would have noticed until it was too late. It was premeditated. Meticulous. Vengeful. And then there was the maze, the very symbol of Cain's narcissism. A grotesque reimagining of the once beautiful DeLeon vineyard. What had once been rows of Merlot and Cabernet was now a winding labyrinth, ornamental and purposeless. When the estate had been sold to Cain, he had hired an architect to erase all traces of the vineyard, replanting over the family's legacy with a smug grin and a pair of pruning shears. Carter had watched it all. Watched the vines get pulled, the wine barrels discarded, the walls of the old family chapel turned into an outdoor bar. And he had smiled through it. Served wine to the very man who destroyed his heritage. Polished the silverware. Poured the scotch. Cleaned the blood, when necessary. What fans now saw, what the characters had failed to recognize, was that Carter's loyalty wasn't rooted in gratitude or employment. It was a costume. A masquerade worn for years, designed to lull his enemies into comfort before striking. Even the actor who played him, Vincent Stalba, had given an interview days before the reveal, slyly suggesting that his character would do anything for his boss. But what if Cain was never the boss? What if Cain had been the target all along, and Damian just the first necessary casualty? There was also the journal found behind the cellar cask, believed to have been written by a young Carter, describing the pain of losing his home, the hatred he bore for the men in suits who signed papers with grins, who shook hands over graves they couldn't see. He had watched his grandfather fall ill after being forced off the land. He had seen his mother cry herself to sleep beside eviction notices. He had learned from an early age that the law did not protect the righteous. It protected the wealthy. And so he had spent years becoming invisible. A man with no paper trail. No history. No attachments. Until now. Lily, once grateful for Carter's calm presence, began noticing the gaps in his stories. How he always deflected questions about his upbringing. How he never spoke of family, holidays, or childhood. How he always seemed to know too much about the estate's past. Amanda confronted him privately, pushing him to explain why he had deleted the freezer access logs. He denied everything with his usual stoic charm, but there was a flicker in his eyes, something ancient and feral, when she mentioned the name DeLeon. He didn't blink. Didn't speak. Just stared until she left the room with a cold shiver down her spine. The narrative had now become bigger than the murder of Damian. It was about memory. Legacy. The haunting of a family erased. Carter had been planning this for decades. And now, even as authorities tightened their grip, even as Chance whispered to Victor that they may have been looking in the wrong direction all along, Carter stood calm and unflinching. Because to him, this wasn't crime, it was justice. Damian had helped Cain secure the estate. Removing him was the first blow. The next would be deeper. A storm was coming, not of bullets or knives, but of truth. And truth, in Genoa City, was the most dangerous weapon of all. The estate, once a backdrop for opulent dinners and private betrayals, had now become a crime scene soaked in history. Every vine that had been ripped from the soil had been replanted in Carter's mind as a vow: he would make them all pay. And now that the seeds had bloomed, there was no going back. Nick, still bruised by wrongful accusations, stared out the window of his temporary holding cell in disbelief. Sharon, piecing together what she'd seen in the cellar, knew that they had touched something sacred and cursed. Lily, Amanda, and even Chance, each now aware that the man they trusted was not just a servant but the architect of a long-delayed reckoning, were unsure how to proceed. But one thing was certain. The game had changed. Carter was no longer hiding. He was warning them. And they would do well to listen.